Who are you?
Hi, I'm Tony Hodge. I'm president of the International Council on Mining and Metals.
What does the council do?
So ICMM is an unusual organization. It's a collaborative of the approximately 20 largest mining companies in the world, and our role is to work with our members to strengthen their environmental and social performance. So by our bylaws, we are created to bring positive change to our members' activities, and hopefully through that in a ripple effect across the whole industry.
Why are you at the Roundup?
Roundup is an important meeting on the world scale because it in particular brings together many of the junior community, which are so critical to the larger industry. Now our companies, to give you context, we have 21 companies in ICMM. They employ about 1 million people out of the 2.5 million people in the formal mining industry across the world. The junior community makes up much of the remaining 6,000 companies that comprise the formal mining industry in the world, who are registered, who are statistically important, who are funded through stock markets. That's the best estimate we can come up with. Now, of course, that does not include the 10, 20, 30, 40 million that are part of the informal artisanal small-scale mining operations across the world, which is also important in its own right, but tends to be a little bit outside of our mandate.
What have the miners and the juniors been telling you at the show? Obviously, we've been through some tough commodity prices and tough financing.
Yeah, the good people understand that things go up, things go down, everything that goes down comes up again. And in fact, I'm just 3 or 4 days back from the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, and the sense there is, while it's not fantastic times ahead, there are very, very positive signals in the world economy right now. The growth projections for China are solid at 7 to 7.5%, although we may see a shrinkage in the early part of 2014, but it's almost guaranteed that it will pop back up, and China will meet those targets. The USA is recovering and is in a stronger position and is expected to get a 3% growth rate this coming year. And the European Union, which is behind, is still going to experience a growth rate of probably at 1%. And when you put 7 and 3 and 1 together of those three centers of the world, it's impressive. And the commodities that are of concern to the mining and metals industry and the exploration industry in particular are driven. The need for those commodities is solid as a rock. Population is growing, urbanization is continuing, so the signals for the future are very, very good. And the recent downturn, many of the major companies, what they clawed back on were the new projects, but the existing projects are pretty much steady as she goes. So I don't think it's as down as some people sense. So coming away from Davos, I would describe the sense in the world is cautious optimism. An area of the world that has been less thought about, where it's really moving, is Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is probably the engine in the world that's really perking along right now. Huge changes in Africa right now. So I would say that at this point the signals are cautiously optimistic. I don't think we'll ever see the huge high race for commodities and the huge high price increases that we saw a few years back, or less within 18 months really of our. So this has been a short, in my view, down. It's not a big down as some people thought when we were coming into this, and I think we're on our way out. Drilling seems to have plateaued, by the way, in terms of the drilling numbers are beginning to come back up, and there are other good signals that reinforce what I'm saying.
Why is Africa doing better right now? Is it better governance?
Very, very good question. No, I think two things come to my mind right away. Number one, Africans are taking a hold of their own future in a remarkable way, and it's a change in spirit as much as anything. They understand that they can do it. They are doing it. They're making it work. They're taking advantage of modern technological changes. The communications system in Africa is exploding in its sophistication. But there's another big change, and that is the African people have realized that better for Africa with the resources that it had, rather than take the resources, build a road to the coast and send the coast off to the commodities off to the mother country, better to concentrate on internal Africa, intra-country trade. And that's changing the nature of the economic growth in Africa. So there's a lot of effort going into building transportation corridors that are linking Africa to itself and internally. There's tremendous possibility there. And that's where a lot of the excitement stems from.
What about resource nationalization? I talk about Africa, but also around the world.
Well, you have to be very careful with your words there, because it was actually Ernst & Young or PwC who introduced the idea and the language of resource nationalism. Resource nationalism has to do with countries deciding that they don't feel that they have their fair share. They want to make sure they have their fair share. Nationalization, the concept of countries actually expropriating, if you wish, businesses or properties or whatever, hasn't happened for, in fact, a very, very long time. The idea of countries working to ensure that their resource development projects are beneficial for the local people is the way of the world now. We have to do that, and the really progressive countries, and I think all countries, most countries certainly, anywhere in the world, the leadership is saying, we want to make sure that projects are organized, are governed by rules, and are implemented in a way that is beneficial for the shareholders who are risking their capital, but are also beneficial for people in our country. You can't have one without the other. And we're in a transition. I would suggest that we're in a transition right now, where we're learning how to build those win-win solutions moving forward.
Big question, but how do you do that? And how do you do that, not here, but overseas as well?
Listen, that also is a very, very insightful question, because there is a key to this, and that is that I think if you went back 50 years, mining companies and colonizing nations really essentially went in with a very paternalistic attitude that was saying, we know the way to do this, here's the recipe, this is the way we should unlock these resources, trust us. And I think what's happening right now is the way to doing what I'm talking about is a very different kind of way. It is not paternalistic, it is collaborative, it is open. The mining industry has been at the leading edge of innovative approaches to transparency on all fronts. That's actually something many people don't understand. But the idea of dialogue, of collaboration, of cooperation, it has to be the way of the future. We know now across the world that there remains a significant amount of conflict related to mining operations and local communities. You can't ensure stability and risk-free investment for your shareholders if there's going to be conflict. The only way to avoid conflict is through dialogue and collaboration and cooperation. So I think there is a different way of doing it now. It is not paternalistic. It is much more respectful than was done in the past.
You're a small junior, you're just getting involved, you have very little resources, and then you're getting to a place overseas and all of this language is new. What do those people do? What tools do they cast out for? Or what can they do with what they have at the time? If they're overseas, or if they're in Latin America or in Africa, and they're just getting acquainted with those countries.
So there is, and this is also a very, very good question, because the companies that are being successful, and there are some wonderful success stories, the companies who are being successful are companies that know how to build effective relationships. Now, if you think back at the years at UVic when you were at university, would you go to the engineering faculty to get advice about building effective relationships? People that are technologically oriented, the geologists, the geoscientists, the engineering people, the miners that are typical for our industry, oftentimes in the past have not had the skills at relationship building, which are absolutely the key set of skills at this stage. We can do the geology, we can do the engineering, we can understand the technical stuff. It is the human dimension of all of this. It's a kind of small p politics to do with building strong, effective, respectful relationships in cultures that are very different, very, very different than our own. And so the successful people know how to make that bridge. Gone are the days when you can just go in, look at the rocks, pull them out and leave. It's way past us now. Times have changed.
Northern Superior is having a dispute right now in Ontario, and the dispute revolves around if Ontario was doing its work for consultation with First Nations. How are governments doing from their end of the bargain and dealing with communities, potentially dealing with Indigenous communities, and making sure that there's that dialogue that's going so there can be development?
Again, you're putting your finger on a very important issue. In my view, while the world in general looks to companies and wants to hold companies accountable for their performance, which I think is justified, there is much less effort being put to looking at government and holding government accountable for its performance in terms of what it is responsible for. And I think a great many of the issues that have occurred in Ontario around the Ring of Fire, for example, Northern Ontario, could have been eased massively had the governments assumed and discharged their responsibilities in a more effective way. The First Nations people are caught in this. What they want is a way forward that is respectful of their culture so that they can be partners. By decisions that were made a long time ago, governments were assigned certain responsibilities. The Aboriginal community is now wanting to hold government to those responsibilities. The mining companies, in many ways, they have very significant responsibilities in this regard. They need to be held accountable for those responsibilities, but mining companies cannot do what government is responsible for. If government doesn't discharge its responsibilities, mining companies are left holding the shtick, and that's not fair.
Last question. Commodity prices are going to recover. We're looking better right now. What are the trends in the future? What are going to be the next pain points, and what's going to happen in mining industry that it's going to have to address?
Well, listen, there are ups and downs. It's a bumpy ride, and that's not going to change. That's just not going to change. And people that would say we would like it gloriously positive forever, always on the way up, are naive to think that. But nobody in this industry really thinks that. Anybody that knows anything knows that things fluctuate. And it's, if anything, what we're seeing right now is a higher degree of volatility, perhaps, than in the past. But things will go up and down. In terms of the commodities, however, there are certain fundamentals that are not changing. Population of the world is moving up, and it's going to go from 7 to 9 billion sometime in the next decade or so. Urbanization is continuing at a very, very rapid pace. That's not going to change. With urbanization and the development of a middle class across the world in countries that were previously much less well off, the middle classes are emerging, and with that comes the demand for commodities. So there will be a demand. What gets out of whack is the balance between supply and demand. If the industry overbuilds on the supply side, things get out of balance, and that certainly is the case, for example, with aluminum right now. But so there will be volatility, but the fundamentals are solid as a rock. We need the materials, even if you recycle much, much more efficiently, which we certainly can. Even if you recycle to the maximum of our capacity, we do not have the resources to fulfill the needs of society moving forward. And interestingly, this is a need for commodities that in fact is going to allow humankind to walk more lightly on the earth. For example, people don't realize that for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity generated by a wind turbine, it takes 10 times the copper than to generate that kilowatt hour by a traditional classical diesel generator system. So we need the commodities, the fundamentals are there, so the future in that sense is solid as a rock. Will there be volatility? Absolutely. There will be ups and downs. And we should prepare for that and do much better given that inevitable bumpy ride ahead of us.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome, Michael. Thank you.